Okay, so let's get started. So we're on Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph. So yesterday we had read the Mishnah, just stating about how who we will rely upon for the measurement, as well as testifying about Eruv. So as normal for the measurements, you want to have an expert surveyor do it. We also mentioned how if there's discrepancy, you follow the more lenient of the measurers, and that's the order who you would follow. And we also mentioned that normally we wouldn't rely on the testimonies of maidservants or of slaves, but in this case we were relying on them because the Tchum 2000 Amos is Midrabanan. So therefore, we don't need to worry about. We don't need to be so confident about it. As long as somebody can say this is where it is, that's enough for us to rely upon. So now the Gemara is trying to figure out why we're following the surveyor, even when it comes off. So the Makom Shariba in, the Makom Shemiet Lo. Wait, so we only follow the surveyor where he makes the measurement of the tool bigger, but now it makes it longer. Like, wait, how does that work? We're relying on the surveyor. So what is it? So Emma Alpha Makom Shariba. No, so the Medrash says that we follow him, the surveyor, even if he made it bigger than you thought, even if you would think you made a mistake, you don't have to worry about it. So we're very reliant, we're very trusting of these surveyors. You have, since this might require let's get the diagrams back up. Again. Okay. There we are. So let's break it down that I can see too, while others can see. There we go. Here, basically, the case of the Mishnah is if we have a discrepancy between the people measuring, right? So let's say if we have two people coming out of the city and they each have a different measurement, right? So we take the one that's longer and the one that's shorter. Even there's a discrepancy. Okay, so that's the case we're talking about now. So how to Lamli, what do you need to say this as opposed to the previous case? We follow the more lenient measurement. This is obviously follow the farther one because we follow the more lenient position. Other cover doesn't mean to say Riba Echad Umied Echad Shomim Lazeh Shariba. No, this is saying that even if there's two measures you're measuring, you still follow the larger person, the person who has the more lenient measurement, even though you might think it doesn't make sense. So how much is the discrepancy? In which case we say there's no way that this could be. That's if it's the difference of the diagonal, right? So if you had calculated a diagonal from the city, so that would be right. So normally, it's you've got 2,000. So, but if it's you're gaining the extra 5, so the diagonal again becomes 1.4, right? So if you are getting more than that extra that if you measure on the diagonal, it's more than that, then you for sure made a mistake, and there's nothing else that you can say, right? So again, this if you measured out here it says it end up being 572. Because if you measure on the diagonal, you're that far off. Again, that's more than 20% difference. Then or 25% difference. So then that means something's wrong. Like that's not enough to say it's discrepancy. That's just simply that's not oh maybe we one guy swallowed a tchum, one guy didn't swallow the like we said before, like last mention about Mavlian, about how they measure a slope or not a slope. So that leads like a couple meters, a couple amot here or there. But to be off by that many amot, that doesn't make sense.
This is sort of like the question I asked at the end yesterday about the margin of error. That's quite a large margin, like 1.4.
Correct. That's like 40% margin of error, which is very high.
Right.
So it's because really, according to everybody besides Rabbi Akiva says that the margin of error is this whole thing of the Tchum of 2000 is Rabbanan. And even according to Rabbi Akiva, we'll get to, in terms of say if a person happens to simply have walked out, I think we mentioned it already, but we have a call come up again later. That if you leave the, let's say if you're standing somewhere, you walked out on the Shutaramim, even though we'd say that really that issue before Amon and you violated, we say it's up 4 times 1.4 before you end up actually being chayav actually being chayav. Let's say for chata. Or you have to have walks for sure, according to if you had drawn it in the weirdest way, like the most lenient possible period you could stretch out of this situation. That's the only time you're actually fully chayav for violation of zah or tchum. Here, so like because this also seems to support that of the opinion of the Rambam and others who say that it's the right until Yud Beis Meal. So then we're very far from Yud Beis Meal because that's 12 times 2,000 amot. So since we're very far from there, so therefore we're not so worried. Right, that's the Deraita level, which we're nowhere near that for Tchum. So like, but as far as for the Tchum we're mentioning for the city like that, we can be a little more flexible. Again, not to the point where it looks ridiculous, but a little bit will be okay to mess around with. That's why, again, the diagonals is too much of it. That's just too much of a percentage-wise gap. That's that 40% difference is that's like that. Yeah, you can't gloss over that. So, right? The point of the 2,000 amot isn't to make things harder for you, make it easier for you, that we don't accidentally end up violating the closure tchum. Another right that says no, the laws of tchum aren't lahakel; they're to be machmir for you. So Marvina lo lahakel divrei Torah, lahachmer divrei Torah, utchumin midrabanan. We're not saying they're being machmir in terms of the din of deraita. We're saying that they're being machmir about something midoraita, which means that the tchum is midrabanan, and it's there to help you. That's why it's not really a problem yet. Okay, so that's how we conclude. Okay, so now we're going on to the next. Okay, now we're gonna hold off on measurements for a while. We're switching Mishnayot. We're switching to now we're going to be talking about joining of different cities. Yeah, not measurements, but still in regard to how it's going to work. So, Ir Shel Yachid, V'Naseit Shel Rabim, Ma'ar V'Net Kula. So you have a city that used to be owned by an individual, and now it is owned by a collective. You can make an Eruv in the whole city. Right? So therefore, right, yeah, no, not so difficult. Right, so that's the city originally been owned by one person, then became and many people again used not anymore, but it used to be like the clock back a century or so. Were whole towns that were owned by an individual, and they had a couple of people. People would rent space, like let's say corporate towns. This didn't be deemed illegal in most countries, but by the processing plant, they'd put up a whole series of housing projects. That way, their workers could live near work, and they, as part of their salary, they say you can live here too for your families and everything, and it'll be nice and easy. Not really done anymore, but that's what it used to be. So, right, so it switches from being a privately owned to being a group owned. So again, it's easy to make errors because one person owns the whole thing. No worries. If it's owned by many people, then it can start getting complicated. So. But here we say that it's still okay to make an Eruv over that whole area, as long as it started from Yachid and went to be owned by a Rabim. But they call Rabim and not say Shel Yachid. But if this was a large city owned by many people, and then it becomes owned by an individual, meaning it becomes to be a very small city owned by with one primary owner. So, right. So, and you can't make an Eruv unless you leave part of the area outside as not being part of the Eruv. עיר חדשה שביהודה, שיש בה 50 דירים, זה יהודה, ושמעון אומר, 3 חצרות של 2 בתים. Right, so the question is, how much of your city you're making your Eruv has to be excluded? So, so Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be enough of an area that would hold a city of 50 people. That's how much to leave off. But Rabbi Shimon says no, as long as you leave, 3 chatzerot of 2 houses apiece, that's all you need to leave off. Right. So again, this is all assuming that we have not. Right, there's no actual shatarabim or any other technical construction issues that are in the way. Right. So I guess in terms of the area, so we have 50. So there's like 50 housing blocks over here on the corner. As opposed to just 2 or 3 would be like a very small. Like so, somebody's house would be out of the air. Like a couple of houses would be out of the area, and that would be it. Not necessarily. Jewish people's houses, you could, decide that that'll be for the non-Jews just to make your life easier, so that it was actually, stuff not carrying. But that's the way you would have to do it. So this is also, so this we'll see that this issue comes up in terms of when people are building Eruvin. The question is, should you include the entirety of your city, or do you have to leave certain parts of the city out? And also, some cities have a I've heard of having a Shabbos of where they deliver normally it's like a Shabbos before Pesach when they set the new Eruv. Basically, they have a Shabbos of they tell people not to rely on the Eruv unless you really need to. Just people don't forget what it's like to live without an Eruv. Okay, so again, I don't believe that's going to be happening anytime soon in Toronto, but something to think about. So people remember what Eruv it is, because most of the time people don't run into the issue of either Eruv or Tzom unless they happen to be spending Shabbos in a cottage in the middle of nowhere. So, but if everybody is spending Shabbos in a cottage in the middle of nowhere, please consult your Rabbi Kraken or your local or whoever your Rabbi Machshir in the area of your cottage happens to be. So we're trying to figure out. So what we mean by an individual city became a city of many. So Amar of Yehuda, Kagon, Descarta, the Reish Gluta, the city of Descarta of Reish Gluta. Basically, so this is literally the Reish Gluta used to have his nice. Had his nice city where he lived all by himself, and then until sometimes people would we'll stop sharing because we don't need this for now. So right, so it used to be that right, so he had his own little complex, and then but then eventually it became a city which had a lot of people because he was so important that the city built up around his residence. Right, let's say right. So that's what happened, right? Initially, it was just for him, and then all of a sudden, there's a city around him, and he's like, "Oh, oops." So, over there, Nachman, my timeline. Ilim Rishum the Shlichi Gabe Harmana Madkre Dadi Kuli Yisrael Nami, but Safar the Shav Shlichi Gabe Hadadi. Right. So why do we mention the case of the Reish Gluta? Because why do we mention the case of a governor? Where basically everybody's going there to get their permits, and therefore it ends up becoming like while everybody's waiting online, it's basically like it's a city because it's that many people showed up on certain times of the year. So we say no because that's not really the case, because that's not how it works. Then we say, but if you wanted to say it's just because people showed up, and that's all it is, then you should do the same issue by a shul, because Kulei Yisrael, you find that all the Jews are together on Shabbos morning, right? They all live wherever they live, right? So this is not modern day. This is long time ago, right? So basically, everyone walked, and everybody had their little their little house on the edge, and then everyone walked to the town center where the shul was. So does that mean that now all of a sudden the town center is called an Ir Shel Rabim because everybody kind of walks to shul on Shabbos? No, that doesn't make it an Ir Shel Rabim now. El Amar Nachman Kagon Descarta did not Tuesday. Rather, it's the city of the city of Natuzzi, because that literally went from being a case where one guy owned everything to the fact that people showed up and bought the area surrounding them, became that went from being an individually private owned area to being owned by many. And that's what we that's what we're stating. Okay. If anything is unclear, please let me know and I'll happily repeat more. But I think for now we've covered concepts that cover the individually owned city versus the large city. The rest of the concepts hopefully should be familiar. Again, if they're not, please let me know and I'll explain them further.
Rabbi, if you just slow it down a little bit more,
Sure.
and even say the words a little bit more slowly, because, and the thing is, even if you repeat it, I'll give you a mashal. If a car is going by in front of my house at 100 kilometers an hour, and a cop says, "Did you get a description of the driver?" I'm going to say he was going too fast. If the next day he goes by 100 kilometers an hour again, and the cop says, "Did you get a description?" No, he was still going too fast. The third day, it's going to be the same thing. He's going too fast. But if you went 50 kilometers an hour the first time, I'll get the description. So,
got it. Okay. So I'll. Okay. So
I don't know about everybody else. I'm just saying for me.
Okay. So I'll let's discuss what we just discussed again. Hopefully it'll be a little clearer. We're talking about,
and I find that you sometimes you start nice and slow, and you talk, and if I miss even one word, I lose the whole sentence. I don't know about anybody else. I'm just speaking for myself. But sometimes you speak beautifully slowly, and I get it, and then I think you lapse into sort of your natural, Gemara learning thing. And so if you keep that, for me, again, I'm talking for myself. I don't know about anybody else, but.
Thank you for the feedback. Very happy to hear that. So again, so sometimes when I get excited, I tend to speed up a little bit, which is a problem. I know. So just if I went too fast over a point or a sentence or two, just tell me. I didn't catch that. Please go over it again a little bit slower, and I'm happy to do it again. Okay. So
thank you.
Let's sum up from what we covered so far. So we were talking about in general, the purpose of tchumen is to make things easier on you, right? That's the concept of tchumen, right? So the question now we're trying, and then we transition. That was the previous Mishnah, and now we're transitioning over back from tchum or back into the concept of general eruv chaserot and carrying. We're trying to figure out is so now it seems like we've switched. The question is, do those concepts still apply or not? But it seems that they don't quite apply, because for instance, when we were talking about a tchum, it applies and it doesn't apply. But for tchum, there's no mentioning of, let's say, we should leave parts deliberately out of it so people don't make mistakes. Right? You've never heard somebody say, now that we've got our Eruv for so long, we should make people remember what tchumen is. It's not something you've ever heard from anybody ever, right? Saying how like the merits of tchum, like you probably haven't heard that before. But you have heard people saying, it's a shame people always, don't understand it. Like, about air, when they talk about air, they refer to the fact about the carrying part. Now people are not taking Shabbos seriously by their usage of Eruvin. That at this point, I believe in Toronto, the only ones who are still holdouts would be Chabad. But again, so they're saying that there's something to be said about the not carrying and why that's contributes to Shabbos, but I've never heard anybody make the argument in regards to tchumen. I could make a good argument for tchumen, as I have in the past, and I could make again, because because part of, again, in urbanized society, it tends to fall apart because your tchumen just ends up being supremely huge for the most part. But in a more rural setting, then the point is to focus you in on your local community so you can experience what Shabbos is like with them at the time, and that's what your Shabbos experience should be. So we're talking about how to maintain. Again, this would fit it more to the Chabad, the people who aren't proponents of having everywhere, having an Eruv everywhere, because they feel that it detracts somewhat from the experience of Shabbos. They're saying that, so the Chazal are laying out when you should or shouldn't be able to use an Eruv for your whole city. They say if it's a private city, meaning it's like one person's compound with like their whole family and all the people who work for them and like that. So that's the Eruv Yachid. No problem, you can Eruv over the whole thing. It's all owned by an individual. Go for it. And even if, let's say, eventually people move in, you have to be worried about it. No, it's still that person's city. Even if, because, the person was so popular, like the, let's pretend that 770, Crown Heights wasn't, and it is the middle of a very large city called New York City. So assuming it wasn't, and then all of a sudden, thanks to the influence of the Rebbe, over being a city of, 100 of his family and friends to being, city of 10,000 now, which you say, oh, now it's for Shittar Rabim. So the answer is, you say, they can still make the Eruv because it's still the Rebbe's, it's still, it's still all Crown Heights, all owned by one individual, and it's fine. But as opposed to, say, the reverse case where it used to be, a very big city, and then what happened? Let's say it was, let's say the main business in town was there was local mine, right? Everybody used to live there to go to to mine, and then all of a sudden they all move out. The question is now, can I make an Eruv over this whole city, even though now I was owned only by one person or one corporation, one small group? To say no, because we still need people don't make a mistake about Eruv and about carrying. We're going to say you have to leave off a part of your larger city. So that people don't forget about carrying in general. So again, the question is how big that doesn't have to be. These will leave off. Is it an area of 50 people's residence, or is it the area of three courtyards that have two houses, which means basically the amount that 6 homes, which is again much smaller than 50. So that'd be the question. So then we're talking about the case of which is the model of the city that pops up overnight from individual city to being that of many. And we said that comes from the case of the Reish Galuta. He used to have his own complex out in the middle of nowhere, but then because he was so popular, people kept going to him and talking to him, and they started moving out. The whole city developed around him. So that's the case where it was individual, and then it became a city of many. And that's our archetypal case. So then we said that and we say it has to be, and then we also mentioned the fact that it's not that people are temporarily there, because if so, then every shul will become a Shittar Rabim whenever he shows up, which we don't say. And then we mentioned that the city we're fully went from being an individual city to being another example, the city of not Zui, where again went from being a city of an individual who a lot of people moved in, and then it became a city of many, but they still let them use the original status of being an individual city. So now we're going to get into the question of, even if it had been an individual city, are there cases where you can't, how can and can't you make your Eruv? So if we had a city that belonged to an individual, became a larger city, and it also has a Shittar Rabim, a public thoroughfare going right on through it, can we make an Eruv for the city or not? So the answer is yes. So what do you do? Osa lechi mikan, lechi mikan. So on each side of the Shittar Rabim, you put a lechi. Kor mikan, or you put a cross beam over the top. Let's see. Do we have a? Here we go. Again, let's look at the photo here again. So that'll be the lechi over here and lechi over here, or you put a beam across the top over here also, which would serve the same purpose. Remind people that that's the boundary of the region, and they shouldn't be carrying outside of it. And then they can they can carry move around as normal in the middle. The whole city is now properly has an Eruv. And we say in terms of making the Eruv, we don't let you make an Eruv for half of the city. Rather, either you make every alleyway separate, really have this as its own sub Eruv, or you should make an Eruv for the whole city. But don't leave out an area of this Eruv Shel Yachid that became Shel Rabim. That'll be very hard to, because then that'll leave people making mistakes, and that's not helpful, right? So either every individual alleyway that leads into the Shittar Rabim will have their own, so each sub cul-de-sac will have their own Eruv, and then the Rosh Hashanah is you can't carry, or the whole city is one Eruv. Those are your options. So now we have another case. Again, if we have a city that is a full city with many individuals, but the thing is, though, it only has one entrance, meaning it doesn't really have a true Rosh Hashanah at any point, because again, a city with only one entrance, right? So that can't be Rosh Hashanah because it's not. You can't go straight on through, right? There's just a doorway into a city, and the city is closed. So in that case, right? Now we're on my back, right? So again, so if it was a city of many, and then, but the city happens to only have one entrance, then you can still make an Erev on the whole thing because it means that it's not truly there's no true Rosh Hashanah going through it. Now I've got a question about that whole BAYT we had before about making the Erev for this case. So Montana to Ma'arva, Rosh Hashanah, this is when could we make an Erev on Rosh Hashanah? Right? How's that possible? Okay. Well, how are we making an Erev for this Rosh Hashanah case? So now those are some examples we'll get to in just a moment. So Amar Huna, Braid Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yehuda Hi, Titania, Yeter Alkein, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mishi Yeshon Shnei Batim, Bishnei Tidei Rosh Hashanah, Ose Lechi Mikan, V'Lechi Mikan, Okora Mikan, V'Okora Mikan, V'Nose V'Notem B'Emsa. Rulo Ein Ma'arvin Rizram B'Kach. So now the question of, are you allowed to make can you really fix the Rosh Hashanah that we had of the city by simply putting a lechi or korah up? Is that really enough to put lechis on both sides or korahs on both sides? So when Rabbi Yehoshua says yes, and that means that BAYT is according to Rabbi Yehuda, because he has this thing. If you're living by the side of the road, again, we won't be seeing it so much around these parts because that wouldn't be considered to be safe. But if you happen to be in older towns, people used to over Israel. This happens a lot also. That you have, let's say, the not quite highways that it's a 2-lane road that have really high speed limits still. But you sort of almost you sort of have 80 or 90 on them. I don't know why it's dangerous, but that's the laws are. And people build it's a short couple steps down to the to the roads here. That's just a couple steps down to the road, which is not quite a highway, but pretty close to a highway. Right, a major road that would lead to the next highway, and that's how they build. So yeah, driving through there is always scary because you have to be make sure nobody's crossing. But yeah, people used to build that way. So so in that case, so Rabbi Yehuda says what you can do is you can simply put up on each side of the Rosh Hashanah. You put a little lechi here, a little lechi there, or a korah here, a korah there, and then you can use the area in between and carry from one house to the other house, and the area in between on Shabbos. So, and then the Chachamim turned around and said, you can't do that. It's not how you fix Rosh Hashanah, right? You need to have a proper some there say you have an actual wall to fix Rosh Hashanah. None of this, I put a little lechi here like it's a mavoy. It's no, that's a road. You can't do that. So now I'm going to analyze another part of the BAYT above. So one of the question was that allowed you to make an Erev to begin with over the Rosh Hashanah, right? It allowed you to make an Erev over this public thoroughfare. Again, so that's also one of the issues we have in modern Erevs, is that if something has status of a Rosh Hashanah, almost you have to figure out how to get around it because it tends to be very difficult to make that into a proper separate rishus. So now we're back to the case of, okay, so now assuming that we've either solved that case by using Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, or we have the case where there was one entrance into the city, so therefore it's not truly Rosh Hashanah. There's no actual Rosh Hashanah in the city. So Amar Ein Ma'arvin Otel Chatzai. So the BAYT had said you can't ma'arv half of it, right, or partially, right? You're supposed to do it, make an Eruv for the whole city, or make separate ones for each mavoi, but none of this, leaving out a random section. That's just not for an Ir Shel Yachid. That's just not how we do it. Amar Papa lo amru ella lo orka aval rachba ma'arvin. So when you say that you can't do it according to the length, but you can't do it according to the width. So what does that mean? Because you're like, aren't cities, round, and you're going to be met. That's going to be non-people no matter what. So the answer is that, well, you see the diagram here. The question is, how's the city constructed, right? So when we say or call the rachba, right, according to Rashi, right? So basically, the way that you don't build a town, you have the Rishut Rabim going straight on through. If you see a picture of, let's say, of the map of Old Jerusalem, you saw that the corridor used to go straight on through, bisecting the whole city right down the middle, right? So there's like, there's like a north half and a south half of the city. So that's what would be here. When I say orka v'rachba, the question is, are you orka would be that you break it up right through the middle of the Rishut Rabim. Meaning Rishut Rabim is the no carrying land, but you can carry on the right side and the left side of the city, on the two sides of the Rishut Rabim. You shouldn't divide it up that way. There's between that not having the Rishut Rabim as a divider, but having the itself split into two. That's something we don't want to do. And when also we're saying this, we're saying modern Arabs tend to be a series of overlapping circles that become one, just due to like logistical issues. So, but again, here they're saying that you're potentially making two non-overlapping circles, which you don't want you to do. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Okay, so come on. So who would be the opinion who says that you shouldn't do it in two separate sections? So Kamad lo Rabbi Akiva. It's not like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva would say that you can. Rabbi Akiva ha'amar regel hamuteret b'mkoma oseret afilu shalom b'mkoma. Right. So this is not according to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said that in regards to that here. So now we're going to see the picture below here. Basically, if somebody who can't carry one place is able to walk through another place, that creates an issue. So now the world, what does that mean? Right? That means this is in the structure here, right? In this case, right? So then the people on each side of the city will end up walking through they can't carry, they'll still be walking through the Rishut Rabim on their way. And that's a problem. Because if a person who can't use the area is walking through the area and has to walk through the area to exit, that means that the Eruv in that place does not work anymore. You can't exclude somebody's not included in the Eruv, using the area enclosed by the Eruv is a problem. Right? So if you're on a little cul-de-sac, right, Eruv, so there's nobody else besides the cul-de-sac, let's say this area over here. So these people, all houses open onto here, but nobody else. So they should be using it, have a right to use it, but nobody else really does. So even if somebody from outside were to walk in, we don't really care. But in the case over here with the Rishut Rabim down the middle, is that if they wanted to walk somewhere else, they have every right to use the public thoroughfare. And if they're not right, so they're walking from this side of the street to that side of the street of the main road, right? So anybody can do that, and they're allowed to do that, and they're supposed to do that. So that if you had made an error which excluded somebody from usage, then that means that, according to Mekiv, that your Eruv is no good. So then we said no. So everything I just explained is wrong. The filutim Rabbi Akiva, hadkal kama Rabbi Akiva hatam elo b'shtei chaserot zoli fanim mizu tipnimit late la pitcha achrina aval hacha hani nafki b'hai pitcha v'hani nafki b'hai pitcha. No, that's not the case of Rabbi Akiva. Is we're talking about a case of if the only outer courtyard over here had tried to make an Eruv. We say if that doesn't include the people in the inner courtyard, that's no good because they have no choice but to walk right on through this outer Eruv to get where they need to get to. So that's not a good example. But in our city, why do we say that that's okay? Because there's always two sides of the city. Like, so what we say is that if the Eruv included, do we have a picture? We don't really have a picture here. Okay, fine. So, but again, so we said that each of them can go out of a different side, right? So when we divided the city in half about over here, but really it should have been more put on a diagonal, right? So the people on the right side can exit to the north, on the left side through the south, and that way there still is a way to leave the city. So therefore, it's not like you trap them in without being able to leave, and that's why it's still an okay Eruv. Right? Rabbi Kiva's upset when you says that if you try to make an Eruv that'll lock somebody in their house, that excludes them from leaving their houses. That's a problem. Not if they can, go the other way and avoid your little Eruv. Not that that's so again, not that that's the right thing to do to exclude people from Eruv, but again, sometimes we're referring to a time when people didn't have enough food. So basically, if you only had enough food, let's say to collect for the people in your little cul-de-sac, then that's why you'd only have 5-6 people included as opposed to having more, because simply it's expensive to have an Eruv to include everybody. Amri Amar Papa Lo Tema Lo Arka Had Lo Ma'arvin Aval Lo Rachba Ma'arvin Ela Filo Rachba Not Lo Ma'arvin. So some says that our Papa's opinion is actually different than what we had before about the difference between lengthwise and widthwise. But how to establish, rather, it says that there's no way to establish that actually, he says, no matter what, you can't make an Eruv on half of the city. You have to make an Eruv on the whole city. There's none of this, north half, south half, east, south, west half, no matter how your city is divided up into quarters or quadrants and divided by the rabbims. It doesn't matter. We don't let you do that. So come on, so this new version of Papa. So who's it like? Rabbi Kiva. It's like Rabbi Kiva. So a few Tamer Rabbanan. Not only Rabbi Kiva's opinion is said that it has access as a problem, rather it could be even Rabbanan's opinion. Ad kan lo kamer Rabbanan hatam ela b'shtei chatzerot zolifnim mizu. You could say that when does the Rabbanan have an issue of making separate Eruvs? Only when it's one within the other one. Because people in the inner courtyard will definitely walk on through and utilize the outer one. Right? But when you're dividing a city up, right? So that's different because neither one can divide up into the rabbim. So no matter what, you still got a problem. No matter how you would have done your Eruvs, it's still going to be a problem. So, okay, so that's what we decided. So again, parent version of Papa, whether or not we'll let you do separate Eruvs or not to separate Eruvs for a city. So Amar Mar, back to the original Breita. Okula, a mavoi mishnei atzmo. Either you do the whole thing or each mavoi on its own. Wait, so why are we letting you do each individual mavoi? Not the same thing as dividing up a city into different Eruvs. Like, why would we allow that, but not dividing in half case? Why is it okay to do it for each of the individual mavois? You made a daka, which is basically it's a short little either a little gate or an extra just a coverage on the floor. Again, not looking as to which thing daka really is. Again, is it like a low gate, or is it just simply a piece of wood on the floor? Here, see here, this is the difference between see the pictures here. The one on the top, that's seemingly the daka is just a piece of wood on the floor, versus over here where you see the daka is a little with a little gate, right? A low gate. Yeah, not an effective gate because you can't really fit underneath it. But again, it's something to differentiate the location. So the Chihad the Amar of Edi Bar Abin Amar Rav Chisda, and that which Rav Edi son of Abin said in the name of Rav Chisda, Echad b'nei Mavoi she'aser daka lemitcho ne'oser al b'nei Mavoi. So we said that if there's somebody other than the Mavoi who doesn't wish to join the Eruv, if you put a daka there, then that means that even though he's not part of the Eruv, it still allows the rest of the Mavoi to make an Eruv over the Mavoi, and he simply says that I'm not part of it by doing that. Normally, if a person says that they're not part of the Eruv, it'll ask for everybody else, but this is a way that he won't be ruining for everybody else. Okay, so Haita Shel Rabim Barei Yesh L'Pitchachad, right? So this is the public city with only one entrance. Rizera Arva Lamata the Beir Bichia below Shabak La Shiur. So Rizera made an error for Bichia city without leaving any empty section, even though it seemingly was a section that, even though it seemingly was a public city. So Amar Le'Abaye, my time of Marachi. He's like, wait, why don't you leave out a section? Because we want you to leave out a section, so people don't forget about Eruvin. Amar Le, Savar Didi, Amar Le. No, so this is what the elders of that city told me. Rav Chia bar Asi ma'arav kula. The Rav Chia bar Asi is speaking for the whole city. How does that work? Because we know that the city used to be privately owned and still became a publicly owned city, and that's why this is okay. Which would be very helpful. This would be helpful for, let's say, for the area of Thornhill, because it was all owned at one point by Tannenbaum, because he was a rich developer. Some questions, would that work or not, or is it only which he functionally owned, all people live there? I'll leave that question aside for you're reading up on the history of the Toronto Eruv, but yeah, so that's a fun question. So Amr Le, Lididi, Amr Li, Hanu Saudi. So then Abai said, but I heard from the same elders that Ahi Ashba Havlachad. He said that I heard the reason why it worked is because on one there used to be a giant pile of dirt on one entrance, a pile of trash. Ashta de Ipna Le Ashba Havalek Shnei Pitzim Basar. Said no. What I heard was that originally, right, the Rishon Rabbim, one side was covered up with trash. So therefore, that's why they were allowed to do it, not because it was an Ir Shel Yachid, but because it was an Ir Shel Rabbim with only one entrance. And now that we cleared the garbage, now it's a problem. Amar Le Lavadate. So then there says, oh, I didn't hear that. You're right. If I'd known that, you're right. We shouldn't have made one area for the whole city. For the whole city, we should have left off at least a small section. So then Rav Ami, the son of Ada, from Harpanya, said to Abba, Sulam Mikan, Petach Mikan, Mahu. So if we have on the Rishon Rabbim, one side you get up via steps or a ladder, the other side has a normal entrance. So is this Rishon Rabbim or not? Amarav, Sulam Torah Petach Alav. We said that, so Rav says that you treat a ladder as if it's an entrance, which in this case would be, which in this case is not helpful, which would be bad, because that means that it's considered to be open on both sides. Amar Lu Rav Nachman, Bojan Situ. So Rav Nachman says, no, that's not right. Hachi Amar Rav Adabar Amar Rav. Sulam Torah Petach Alav, the Torah Mechitza Alav. Now you only heard half of his statement. He said that a ladder is both an entrance as well as a wall, right? So the same thing would apply for steps as well. So Torah Mechitza Alav Kedamra, right? We say that it's a wall, as we stated earlier, that if the ladder is good enough to end Rishon Rabbim, right? The ladder or the steps means that's not Rishon Rabbim. If you have steps going up it, that's just not a Rishon Rabbim anymore. That's something else. For Petach Alav, Besulam Shebein Shtei Chatzerot, Ratu Achad Ma'arev, Ratu Shnai Marvin. We say that it's good is that it allows you to, we have here we go, the ladder here or steps here, or this is the trash gate, and this is the gate. And now we say that it can be good because it allows, if we have two people living on both sides, it allows you to treat this as if it's an entryway to get between the two of them. You can actually make an error between the two of you. Similarly, and who said Rahman really agrees that you can the Me'ara advance over a ladder? But Hamar Rahman Amar Shmuel Anshechat Ser Hashemer Pesach Sheshachu V'Lo Yervu Im Yesh Lefnehem Daka Arba and Oseret Im Lav Oseret. Hacha B'Mayaskinam B'Lo Gavoa Berpesat Osara. So here the question is in terms of we have people living upstairs or downstairs. And we're having an air between them, so shouldn't we say that the people upstairs should also those below? So we say if they put a partition of a daka in between, that means that they're separated locations and we're good. But if they didn't, then the people upstairs will mean that people downstairs can't, because their air is no good anymore. So why do we say this is a problem? It's a problem when the two stories are less than 10 tefachim apart. Because then it's all going to be one area, and that's why you can't carry from one to the other one. Okay, so again, we'll pick up with this story tomorrow. So let's just do a quick recap. So we discussed today the question that mentioned that in general that we're measuring out the tzum, we are more makel because the tzum of 2,000 amo is meteor Rabbanan, which allows us to be more lenient with regards to measuring it out. But again, there is a limit on the degree of inaccuracy. At a certain point, we say that that's just like there's no way that they meant that it's too far. So it's more than 40% off. We're discussing the status of a city owned by an individual versus a city owned by many, and whether or not you can make an error for the whole thing or not. Again, individual city, yes. A city owned by many, you cannot. One permissibility would be if the city has only one entrance, then that would allow us to make an error even if it happens to be owned by many. And then we were discussing how precisely we could make the Eruv. Can we divide the city in half? Can we not divide the city in half? Can we make sub Eruvs? Can we not make sub Eruvs? Why in each case we can or can't, based on the circumstances and whether or not we have proper separation between each and every segment.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Much better for me.
Happy now.
Go ahead.
Lots of nice, everybody.
Have a great day.
You too. Take care.